Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much, Mahran, for this introduction to, of course, bring everybody perhaps with a good understanding of the approach that I usually use in my research. So today, inshallah, I will be talking about specifically the Qibla passages in the Quran from Surah Al-Baqarah, and try to understand, because especially since we're really talking about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wasallam, basically we would like to see the Prophet's embodiment of the message of the Quran through the dialogue that exists in the Qibla passages in Surah Al-Baqarah. So let me share my screen with you here. Okay, so basically, typically what many people think about the Qibla passages in Surah Al-Baqarah, they usually think about the direction of prayer. And so I will give you a little bit of a background of what the Qibla passages are understood as by either historians, whether Western scholars, or also by traditional Muslim exegetes, some Muslim mufassirun. So let's try to understand what Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his relationship with the Jews, because usually the Qibla passages in the Quran are understood as an engagement or a conversation with the Jewish audience of the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the story typically goes is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam attempted to convert Jews to his religion. He attempted to invite his Jewish audience to join him in his Islamic religion. Now, according to the historians, he tried to give concessions to the Jews in order to bring them more closer to the faith that he is inviting them to. Such as, for example, in the beginning, he also prayed towards Jerusalem, just like the Jewish people who used to pray, and still, by the way, continue to pray towards Jerusalem. So in the beginning, he tried to give them those concessions, according to historians. And then when he failed to convince most of the Jews of his credibility as a prophet, he started attacking the Jews and then changed the direction of prayer away from Jerusalem, so that he is no longer now giving them any more concessions. Now, as I said, this is what historians actually think is the case. However, is this story, by much of what the historians say, is it true? Or perhaps when we start analyzing the Qibla passages in the Quran, we may actually realize that this story does not actually hold credibility. That the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not simply decide, because he failed to perhaps convert the majority of the Jewish people at the time, he basically started attacking them. That was not the case at all. Actually, the case is very different, and we will see, inshallah, with how the Quranic narrative about the change in the Qibla gives us a very beautiful embodiment of the type of conversation, the type of interfaith dialogue that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually had done. So a lot of people think that maybe the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and even the Quran are anti-Jewish, Because when we read the Quran, of course, obviously, we will see many passages that do appear to admonish the Jewish people. You know, it says, you should have done this, you should not have done that, and so forth. So there is so much admonishment against the Jewish people. But does that mean that the Quran or even the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, does that really mean that they were anti-Jewish? Not at all. Actually, if we compare the Quran with the Bible, and if we compare the Prophet ﷺ with the biblical prophets, we will see that the Bible also had much more admonishments against the Jews than the Quran does. Actually, the Quran seems much milder, much calmer in its approach with the Jewish people. When compared to the Bible itself and the biblical prophets who were admonishing the Israelites, you should not have done this, you should have done so and so and so forth. So in reality, if someone says that the Quran is anti-Jewish, then the Bible is even more anti-Jewish. But in reality, the Bible, of course, is obviously not anti-Jewish, and therefore also the Quran is not truly anti-Jewish. So we have to recognize and understand how we actually look into the Quran's conversation with the Jewish people to realize that in reality it is trying to have a dialogue with them using their own ideas, their own ideologies in a very logical manner, without actually attacking them, attacking their faith, or attacking their tradition at all. And we will see this, inshallah, with the example of the Qibla passages in this talk. So let's look into the Qibla controversy, which Surah Al-Baqarah, passages of Surah Al-Baqarah actually talk about. It talks about some kind of a controversy that existed when the Qibla was changed. Now, when we look into the Qibla passages, we will realize there is no geographical place that is ever named. There is no explicit mention of Jerusalem. There is no explicit mention of Mecca either. Right? There is no explicit mention of any geographical names. But what exactly does the dialogue in Surah Al-Baqarah about the Qibla controversy, what do they actually talk about? Well, let's try to first understand what the Qibla is according to the tradition. So according to Muslim tradition, the Qibla is the direction of prayer. And according to Muslim tradition, Jerusalem used to be the first Qibla for the Muslims. And then it was changed to Mecca. And when the change was made to Mecca, apparently there were many people who were unhappy. And that's what the Qibla passages narrate to us and tell us. So that the change in the Qibla created so much controversy among both the followers of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well as the Jewish people. So when we read the Qibla passages in Surah Al-Baqarah, it wasn't only the Jewish people who were surprised and actually had some kind of controversy, but even some of the followers of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also did not like the idea that the Qibla is being changed from Jerusalem or from wherever it is, because as I said, the passages themselves never mention Jerusalem by name, but from wherever it is to any other different place. And the Quran basically narrates this controversy. So let us look deeply. What is this controversy was all about? Why was there this controversy? Now, according to traditional Muslim exegetes, and when we look at many of the traditional Muslim exegetes, they basically say that there was so much controversy that existed between the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well as some of his followers and the Jewish people when it came in regard to the change in the direction of prayer. And according to the Muslim exegetes, and those Muslim exegetes, they're all over the place. So it's not only with a specific Muslim school of thought, but many different. So if we read that, for example, from At-Tabari, from At-Tabarsi, we all will have the same pretty much understanding of this kind of controversy that existed. And many of those exegetes basically say that initially the Jews were mocking the Prophet ﷺ because he was praying towards Jerusalem, the same Qibla as the Jews were. And because they were mocking him, they were laughing at him, because of him doing that, he wanted that the Qibla be changed. And therefore the Qibla was changed from Jerusalem to Mecca. So basically that is what the commentators, the traditional Muslim commentators, suggest the reason perhaps behind why the Qibla was changed. Well, when we actually look at the intimate dialogue between the Qibla passages in Surah Al-Baqarah with the rabbinic tradition, with the Jewish tradition, we will realize that was not the case. We will realize that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was not basically, just wanted to have something that goes against the Jewish people or the Jewish tradition. We will realize, as I will go over through the Qibla passages, we will realize that in reality, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was having what we may call in modern day an interfaith dialogue, using perhaps the highest extent of what the Quran itself sometimes suggests about whenever you have a dialogue, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and basically have a dialogue with them with what is best, with what is better. And we will see that that is exactly how the Quran portrays the controversy of the Qibla, that in reality it was not an attack against the Jewish people or against their tradition, but it was a very intimate conversation with full respect of the Jewish tradition and the Jewish faith. Now, when we look into the Qibla passages in Surah Al-Baqarah, the Qibla passage basically, of course, it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly where it starts and where it ends, but there are some linguistic markers. There are some markers from the usage of phrases that helps us recognize what part of Surah Al-Baqarah, because obviously Surah Al-Baqarah is the longest surah in the Quran, but what part of Surah Al-Baqarah is actually in full engagement with the Qibla controversy? Well, I personally would suggest that perhaps it really starts with verse 115 of Surah Al-Baqarah. Because in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 115, it actually starts by suggesting that to God belongs the East and the West. Okay? وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ. And this phrase is repeated 3 times in Surah Al-Baqarah within the passages about the controversy of the Qibla. We see this phrase, to God belongs the East and the West, in verse 115, and we see it again in verse 142, and then we see it the last time in verse 177. So I basically suggest that the passages that are discussing the Qibla and its controversy starts with verse 115 and ends with 177. So at the verse of 115, when it basically says that to God belongs the East and the West, and whichever direction you face, there is the face of God. So it starts with that. And then the passage continues to discuss the oneness of God, the importance of the faith of Abraham from verses 116 to 129. And then it continues in its discussion about the oneness of God, about the faith of Abraham, and anyone who does not follow the faith of Abraham fools himself. Okay, so basically these are the passages in Surah Al-Baqarah from verses 130 to 141. So these we could call, so from verse 115 to verse 141 of Surah Al-Baqarah, these we could basically call the introductory of the Qibla passages. Then it goes to verses 142 to verse 150. This becomes like the main part of the Qibla controversy in Surah Al-Baqarah, which basically verse 142 also starts with the phrase, "To God belongs the East and the West." And then finally, the final part of the Qibla passage I would suggest is basically verse 177, which basically states that it doesn't really matter wherever you face, east or west, but what matters is faith, love, giving charity, and so forth. And I will go over now some of the details of the Qibla passages and how they actually compare with the rabbinic tradition and the Jewish tradition, to see how they are actually very much in conversation with one another. So I will call those points of intertextuality, where we see the text of the Quran is paralleling the text of the Bible, of the Torah, or also the text not only of the Torah, but also of the rabbinic tradition, including, for example, the Mishnah or the Talmud, some parts of the rabbinic tradition. And I will basically try to argue that in reality, the Qibla passages in the Quran are basically in full engagement with the Jewish Shemaʿ. What is the Jewish Shemaʿ? So for those of you who may not know, the Jewish Shemaʿ is the most important commandment in the Jewish faith. It actually starts with the phrase Shema' Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad in Hebrew, which means hear, O Israel. Shema' in Hebrew is similar to the Arabic Isma'. So it simply says, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. This is the most important commandment in the Jewish faith, which parallels the Shahada in the Muslim faith, that Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, that I witness that there is no God except God. So just as that Shahada is considered the most important commandment in the Muslim faith, it is paralleling the Shema in the Jewish faith about the most important commandment in the Jewish faith, which is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And then the Shema actually continues and says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And in the Jewish prayers, the Shema is considered extremely important. The Jewish prayers is basically divided in different parts. One of them is actually the Shema recitation, in which all the Jews need to recite both in the morning and in the evening. And The other part of the Jewish prayer is called the Amida. Amida means the standing prayer, and the standing prayer is basically prayed by the Jews 3 times in a day, in the morning after the Shema recitation, and then also in the afternoon, and then also in the evening after the Shema recitation. So I will basically try to show that the Qibla passages are actually in direct engagement with the most important commandment in the Jewish tradition and in the Jewish faith, which is the Shema, which is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength." So let's look into the first point of intertextuality between the Qibla passages and the Shema, the most important commandment in the Jewish faith and in the Jewish tradition. Well, what is interesting is, what does the word Qibla actually even mean? Well, in the Arabic language, Qibla means to accept. Now the question is, okay, so why is the direction of prayer called a Qibla? What exactly does the Qibla, or the meaning of the Qibla, has to do with the direction of prayer? Well, what is interesting is perhaps the Qibla and the meaning of the term Qibla has less to do with the direction of prayer than what actually the Qibla passages of the Quran are trying to make sense of it from the Jewish tradition in its conversation with the Jewish tradition. Because in the Jewish tradition, the Shema, the most important Jewish commandment, which is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength." According to the rabbinic tradition, the Shema is actually called in Hebrew, Kabbalat Hol Malchot Shamayim. Kabbalat is the same as the word Qibla. So the Shema itself is called a Qibla in the Jewish tradition. And it's a Qibla of what? Because as I said, the word Qibla means to accept. It's the Qibla of what exactly according to the Jewish tradition? The Shema is the Qibla, is to accept the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. It is to accept, in other words, to be a servant to the kingdom of heaven, to be, in other words, a servant of God. So that is what the Shema, according to the Jewish tradition, really means. That when someone recites the Shema, when someone recites, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength," it means that they are accepting the being servants of the kingdom of heaven, or being servants of God. So that is the first point of intertextuality. Where did the word Qibla come from? Perhaps what the Quran is trying to do is that it is trying to mirror the Jewish tradition's understanding of what the Shema really is. Remember what I said when I divided the Qibla passages. I said it starts with verse 115 in Surah Al-Baqarah, which basically talks that to God belongs the east and the west. And then immediately afterwards, before talking about the heated controversy that existed about the change in the Qibla in verse 142. So from verse 115 to verse 141, the most important message that Surah Al-Baqarah is trying to portray is the oneness of God and the faith of Abraham. So the Shema, being the most important commandment to the Jewish faith, is all about the oneness of God. So we have to keep in mind that here perhaps that the Qibla passages in the Quran is actually trying to have a conversation with the Jewish tradition about the importance of the Shema. And it is calling it a Qibla just like the Jewish people call the Shema a Qabbalat or a Qibla. The second point of intertextuality that I like to point out is the concept of the sovereignty of God. That God is sovereign. In other words, God is king. So when in the very beginning of the passages of in Surah Al-Baqarah about the Qibla, which is verse 115, it says, "To God belongs the east and the west. Wherever you turn, there is the face of God. God is all-encompassing, all-knowing." So the Qibla passages in the Quran starts by suggesting that God is sovereign. God is king. To God belongs the east and the west. God is sovereign. God is king. And within the rabbinic tradition, the Shema, which is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength," also emphasizes that you are accepting the sovereignty of God. Because as I said in the previous slide, which was intertextuality number 1, I said, well, basically it's calling it Qabbalat all Malchut Shamayim, accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, accepting being the servant of God, or in other words, accepting that God is sovereign, that God is king. So that is something we also see paralleling between the Qibla passages and the rabbinic tradition and commentary and interpretation about the most important commandment in the Jewish faith, which is the Shema, which talks about the oneness of God. The third point of intertextuality that I would like to make is that when we look into the passages in Surah Al-Baqarah that specifically talk about the controversy of the change in the Qibla, or the change in the direction, we see that there is so much repetition of the word al-haq, so much repetition of the word al-haq. And by the way, in the Arabic language, al-haq does not only mean truth. Truth is one of the many different meanings in the Arabic language for the word al-haq. But it is not the only one, because of course the Arabic language has so much polysemy. Polysemy means when a word has multiple meanings that are usually related with one another. And the word al-haq also has multiple meanings. For example, what is law in Arabic? Usually people will say law is qanun in Arabic. Well, qanun is one of the words for law in Arabic. But by the way, qanun is not originally an Arabic word. It actually came from Greek and from Latin, like for example, when you hear, for example, the Christians talk about the biblical canon, it means biblical law and so forth, because the word canon is actually coming from Greek. And that is where the word qanun in Arabic derived the word qanun. It's actually not originally an Arabic word. But what other word for law exists in Arabic? Actually, usually it's in the plural sense. It's called huquq. For example, like when someone studies law, we would say that they're studying huquq. Because another meaning for the word al-haq is not just truth, but also commandments, statutes, and law. That's another meaning for the word al-haq in Arabic as well. So keep that in mind, because in the other Semitic languages, such as Hebrew, for example, the word khuk in Hebrew, which is cognate to the word haq in Arabic, also means commandments, statutes, and laws. So when we read the passages of the change in the Qibla, we see that the term al-haq is repeated so many times. And I here have the English translation, but perhaps for some of you, maybe looking at it from the Arabic original, perhaps may be easier, at least for some of you. But let's look into the Arabic passages of, like, let's say, the heart of the controversy. So basically it says in the passage, قَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ فَلَنُوَلِّيَنَّكَ قِبْلَةً تَرْضَاهَا فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ وَحَيْثُ مَا كُنْتُمْ فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرَهُ. And then it says, وَإِنَّ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ, okay, and those who have been given the book, وَإِنَّ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ لَيَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ وَمَا اللَّهُ بِغَافِلٍ عَمَّا يَعْمَلُونَ وَلَئِنْ أَتَيْتَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ بِكُلِّ آيَةٍ مَا تَبِعُوا قِبْلَتَكَ وَمَا أَنْتَ بِتَابِعٍ قِبْلَتَهُمْ وَمَا بَعْضُهُمْ بِتَابِعِ قِبْلَةَ بَعْضٍ وَلَئِنِ اتَّبَعْتَ أَهْوَاءَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَكَ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِنَّكَ إِذًا لَمِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابَ يَعْرِفُونَهُ كَمَا يَعْرِفُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ وَإِنَّ فَرِيقًا مِنْهُمْ لَيَكْتُمُونَ الْحَقَّ وَهُمْ يَعْلَمُونَ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكَ فَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُمْتَرِينَ وَلِكُلٍّ وِجْهَةٌ هُوَ مُوَلِّيهَا فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا يَأْتِ بِكُمُ اللَّهُ جَمِيعًا إِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ وَمِنْ حَيْثُ خَرَجْتَ فَوَلِّ وَجْهَكَ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ وَإِنَّهُ لَلْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكَ وَمَا اللَّهُ بِغَافِلٍ عَمَّا تَعْمَلُونَ. So in here, in this passage, we see the word al-haqq repeated many times in the reference to the Qibla. So, as I said, if the Qibla passages are directly trying to engage with the Shemaʿ, with the most important Jewish commandment, which is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Then do we see there is some kind of parallelism in using the word al-haq? Well, let's compare it to the Torah, because the Shema is actually in the Torah. It's in the book of Deuteronomy in the Torah. And when we read the Torah in Hebrew, we will see that the cognate al-haq is repeated so many times, not in the meaning or not in the definition of truth, but in the definition of commandments, of statutes, of laws. So for example, basically, if we look at it, and by the way, I have tried as much as possible to make some kind of color coding in order to see the similarities between the Quran and the Bible using similar colors. But in here, for example, just before, in the Torah, just before talking about the most important commandment, which is the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, what does it say? It basically says, oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commandments always, so that it may go well with them and their children forever. Go tell them to return to their tents, but you stay here with me so that I may give you all commands. And of course here, God is basically speaking to Musa alayhi salam, to Moses, so that I may give you all the commands, decrees, ha-khuqim. Okay, that decrees in plural, ha-huqqim, in other words, in Hebrew, and laws, and you are to teach them to follow in the land that I am giving them to possess. And then later on it continues to say, these are the commands, the decrees, ha-huqqim, and laws of the Lord. Your God directed me to teach you. So here basically Moses is basically now speaking to the people, to the Israelites. He's saying, these are the commands, decrees, ha-huqqim, and laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God, as long as you live by keeping all his decrees, huqqotu. So again, the same the same word, haqq, is being repeated. And then later on, it brings the most important commandment in the Jewish faith, which is known as the Shema. It is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. And then it continues, after even talking about the most important commandment, which is the Shema, it continues later on by saying, be sure to keep the commands of the Lord your God and the stipulations and decrees, huqqu, he has given you. Again, the same al-haqq is being repeated so many times within a few passages within the Shema verse in the Torah. And then it continues to say, in the future, when your sons ask you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, the decrees, ha-huqqim, and laws that the Lord our God has commanded you? And then it continues to say, the Lord commanded us to obey all these decrees, ha-huqqim, and to fear the Lord our God. You see, within the Shema passages in the Torah, we see the Hebrew huqqim, which is cognate to the Arabic haqq, repeated so many times. So this basically gives us another intertextuality, another parallelism between the Qibla passages in Surah Al-Baqarah with the Jewish tradition, and in this case with the Torah. Let's look into now the fourth point of intertextuality. So in the fourth point of intertextuality, what exactly do they know? Because the passage in the Quran says that the people of the book know this as they know their own children, but some of them conceal al-haqq, which they themselves know. الذين آتيناهم الكتاب يعرفونه كما يعرفون أبناءهم. What exactly do the people of the book know as they know their own children? Now, when we open the books of tafsir, like for example, you open At-Tabarsi, for example. Well, what exactly did the people of the book know as they know their own children? Well, according to many of the Mufassirun, they give us two different reasons. One narrative or one story or one way they have interpreted this is that the people of the book know that Mecca is the real Qibla and not Jerusalem. Another narrative or another interpretation that some of the exegetes actually tell us is that the people of the book know that Muhammad alayhi wa ala alihi salatu wasalam, know that he is a true prophet, like as they know their own children. Obviously, when we open the Jewish tradition, there is nothing in the Jewish tradition or even in the Christian tradition that suggests that the people of the book know Mecca is the correct Qibla. And there is nothing in their tradition or in their holy books that suggests that they know Muhammad alayhi wa ala alihi salatu wasalam as a prophet as they know their own children. So what exactly is the Quran here referring to? What exactly do they know as their own children? Well, guess what? In the Quran, there is another passage that makes this very bold claim, that the people of the book know something that they know as they know their own children, other than the one in the Qibla passages in Surah Al-Baqarah. Well, what other passage in the Quran is it? It's actually in Surah Al-An'am. There are only two places in the Quran, two verses in the Quran only, which talks about or makes the claim that the people of the book know something as they know their own children. In Surah Al-An'am, the verse is really talking about the oneness of God, which, by the way, just like the Shemaʿ is the most important commandment in the Jewish faith, Ash-Shahadatu an la ilaha illallah is the most important commandment in the Muslim faith. So in Surah Al-An'am, if I show you, this is the English translation, but perhaps some of you might like to see it in its original Arabic. So in Surah Al-An'am, what does it say? It says, قُلْ أَيُّ شَيْءٍ أَكْبَرُ شَهَادَةً قُلْ اللَّهُ شَهِيدٌ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكُمْ وَأُوحِيَ إِلَيَّ هَذَا الْقُرْآنُ لِأُنذِرَكُمْ بِهِ وَمَنْ بَلَغَ أَإِنَّكُمْ لَتَشْهَدُونَ أَنَّ مَعَ اللَّهِ آلِهَةً أُخْرَى قُلْ لَا أَشْهَدُ قُلْ إِنَّمَا هُوَ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ وَإِنَّنِي بَرِيءٌ مِّمَّا تُشْرِكُونَ الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابَ يَعْرِفُونَهُ كَمَا يَعْرِفُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُمْ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. So this is the only other passage in the Quran which makes this bold claim that the people of the book know something as they know their own children. This passage in Surah Al-An'am, which talks about that there is La ilaha illallah, that there is Shahadatun an La ilaha illallah, the witness that there is no God except God, and in the Qibla passages. Is there a relationship between those two passages? Well, let me take you actually back to the Shema passages in the Torah. Let me take you back to the Shema passages in the Torah. So, in the Shema passages in the Torah, which I said uses the word haqq so many times, other than haqq being used so many times, let me take you back here. Yeah. Other than using the word haqq so many times, look at what I have put in the blue color. What does it say? Oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commands always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. Okay? I may give them all the commands, decrees, ha-huqqim. These are the commands, the decrees, ha-huqqim. And the laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees, by his haqq. And then it continues, hear, O Israel. The most important, this is the Shema, the most important command. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you to you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. And then later on, within the same passage, it continues, in the future, when your sons ask you, what is the meaning of the stipulations, the decrees, al-haq, ha-huqqim, and laws? Tell them the Lord. So wait a minute. Do we see that there is some kind of a relationship between something that the people of the book know as they know their own children, which actually even links the Qibla passage with Surah Al-An'am about the oneness of God? Because the Shema is also about the oneness of God, that hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And actually, let's continue with the basically the Shema passages. So we see in the Shema passages that it's repeating so many times that this is the commandment you should teach your children and your children's children forever. This is al-haq, this is ha-huqim in Hebrew, which you should teach them, you should remind them. So wait a minute, is there a relationship? I would suggest that there is a relationship. That basically what the people of the book know as they know their own children is perhaps not what the Muslim exegetes are saying, that the people of the book know Mecca is the real Qibla, or that they know Muhammad alayhi wa ala alihi salatu wasalam is the prophet. But what they know as they know their own children is the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And the Qibla they know is the Shema. Qabalat, Ghul, Malkhut, Shamayim. This is Ha-Huqim that they know. This is Al-Haq that they know. This is the statute that they know as they know their own children. Actually, in the rabbinic tradition, in the Mishnah, it actually says that when your children are babies, when your children first start to learn to talk, they first start to learn to speak, don't teach them, mama, baba, dada. Don't teach them that. The first thing you should teach them is the Shema. The first thing you should teach them is for them to recite, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. So even the rabbinic tradition says this must be the first thing you teach your children when they first learn to speak, the Shema. So now when we put it in the balance of things, when we have two passages in the Quran that talk about something, or it makes a claim that there is something that the people of the book know as they know their own children. One of them is talking about the Qibla controversy. Another one from Surah Al-An'am talks about the oneness of God. Then most likely they are both. From Surah Al-An'am, oneness of God, and the Qibla is actually both referring to the Shema, the oneness of God, the most important commandment in the Jewish faith. And when I say the most important commandment, it's the most important haqq in the Hebrew language. It's the most important haqq. Al-haqqu min rabbika, as the Quran, for example, in the Qibla passages are actually talking about. This is the most important haqq that the people of the book know as they know their own children, which they themselves call the Qibla. Qabalat ul malkhut shamayim, accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. So that is another point of intertextuality. So let's move now to the fifth point of intertextuality. Basically, in the Qibla passages, in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, it basically has a verse 132, which says, and Abraham enjoyed the same upon his children, as did Jacob. O my children, God has chosen for you the religion. فَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. So die not except in submission. Well, when we look into the rabbinic tradition, in the commentary about the Shema, the most important commandment in the Jewish faith, it says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. So in the Mishnah, in the rabbinic tradition, it asks you, what does it mean to love the Lord your God with all your soul? It means even when God is taking your soul. In other words, to the point of death. فَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. The same parallel we see is a commentary on the Shema, on the most important. What does it mean to love the Lord your God with all your soul according to the Jewish tradition? It means to the point of death, even when God is taking your soul. Actually, in the Talmud, it also continues with a beautiful story. It says that there was a man by the name of Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva was actually being executed. And while he was being executed, he was reciting the Shema. And his followers, his students, were telling him, you're reciting the Shema even now as you're being executed and as you're dying? And then he responded to them. He said that in all of my life, I was questioning myself, when will I ever be able to fulfill the commandment to love the Lord your God with all your soul, which means even when God is taking my soul. So now that God is taking my soul, why should not I accept it? So that is why in the Jewish tradition, with all your soul means to the point of death, even to the point of martyrdom. Even to the point of martyrdom. So this is the fifth point of intertextuality between the Qibla passages and the Shema. Okay, so let's look at the sixth point of intertextuality, and this is a very interesting one. In the Qibla passages, in Surah Al-Baqarah, there is a verse 133, which says, أَمْ كُنْتُمْ شُهَدَاء إِذْ حَضَرَ يَعْقُوبَ الْمَوْتِ, right? Or were you witnesses when death came to Jacob, when he said to his children, what will you worship after I am gone? And then his children respond. They said, we shall worship your God and the God of your fathers, Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac, one God, and unto him we submit. Now, what is interesting is that in the Talmud, in the rabbinic tradition, because you see, in the Jewish tradition, after the Jews recite the Shema, they recite a blessing after it. And basically, the Talmud says, why do they actually recite the blessing after it? The Talmud says because it goes back to the story of Jacob. Jacob was on his deathbed. So Jacob was about to die. And he wanted to tell his children about what are the things that will come, that will happen in the future. But when they came to him, the presence of God immediately left Jacob. And so he was afraid. And then he said, is it possible that out of my bed, out of his deathbed, has come someone from among his children, someone unfit among my children, like Abraham, my father's father, from whom Ishmael came forth, and like my father Isaac, from whom Esau went forth. And then his sons responded to him with the Shema. Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Just as there is only one in your heart, so there is only one in our hearts. So we could actually see this parallelism between this Talmudic, this rabbinic commentary about the Shema, and pretty much this verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, which basically talks about also Jacob being in his deathbed and asking his children, what will you worship after me? And they respond, well, with the Shema. So we see this parallelism. So this is the sixth point of intertextuality. The seventh point of intertextuality, which is basically the importance of the oneness of God. Because in the Qibla narrative, as I said, if we start from verse 115, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبِ in Surah Al-Baqarah. And then from verses 116 to 141 of Surah Al-Baqarah, it emphasizes the faith of Abraham and the oneness of God. And the Shema in the Jewish tradition emphasizes the oneness of God, the concept of Tawheed. So this is the seventh point of intertextuality.